Hello and welcome to another Play Better Chess video. So today I'm going to talk about playing your best chess. And in this example game, this is from 1985 from the World Chess Championship match between Anatoly Karpov, who was the reigning world champion, and the challenger Garry Kasparov, who went on to win this 1985 World Chess Championship. This is one of the games that Kasparov won, and we're going to see what we can learn from this to help you play your best chess, which Kasparov had to do here to win this World Championship match. All right. So a quick game review to see what accuracy these players, what level of accuracy they played at. Kasparov had a 93.6% accuracy rating in this game, and his opponent had 88.8. So, high 80th percentile accuracy for Karpov. But even better, 93.6 for Kasparov. And 5 great moves by Kasparov, 1 by his opponent. And it looks like they had some inaccuracies, 1 by Kasparov, 3 by Karpov, and 1 mistake each, but a blunder by Karpov. And it looks like Kasparov played at a 2800 rating level versus 2600 by his opponent. And so let's see what happened here. Turn on the computer analysis to help us learn. And here we go. So these two, they played in 1984 in a previous World Championship match. But the match kind of drug on and on because the rules were different back then. The upcoming World Championship match between Ding Liren and Gukesh Damaraju, they have a 14-game match, and then they'll have tie breaks after that if it's tied after 14 games. But in the 1984 World Chess Championship, the format was different. I believe they played to maybe whoever won 6 games first would be declared winner. And they just had draw after draw after draw, and it may have been the longest World Chess Championship in history. And anyway, the match was called off, and they had a rematch in '85 in which Kasparov won. And in this game, he starts out with d4. Now, Kasparov is known to be a great attacking player. This was early in his career, so maybe he was playing a little more safely here with d4 because d4 openings tend to be a little more strategic. His opponent, Karpov, plays knight to f6, and Karpov is known to be a more strategic, solid player, where Kasparov is more of a tactical, attacking player. So they're kind of players on the opposite ends of the spectrum, and it should be a good clash here. So now we have c4. Because the knight is developed here, it's covering this important central square, so you can't develop this pawn. So the next best thing is to develop the other c pawn beside the central d4 pawn, so they control valuable squares in the center here. All right, so how can you play your best chess? Well, there are many things you can do to improve your chess game. Study tactics regularly. That's at the top of the list, I would think, or one of the things at the top of the list. Just work on your tactics regularly by solving puzzles, by going over tactical mistakes in your own game. And you can also look at the tactics played by great players, like this matchup here. Kasparov and Karpov are 2 of the greatest chess players in history. And you can go over not only your own games, but games of the greatest players in history and see what you can learn from them. So, continuing on, we have this e6 move, which helps control the center here, maybe for a future pawn push to d5. It opens up the bishop here, this diagonal. That way, Karpov can get closer to castling, once this bishop is developed. So Kasparov jumps his knight in behind the c-pawn that he's pushed forward, which is usually a good strategy. Now the knight helps pile up on this d5 square along with the pawn. So pawn and knight combine to cover this square, which is being attacked by the opponent as well. So a showdown on this important square in the center. And now the bishop is developed here. This is the Nimzo Indian defense. The bishop develops here, pinning the knight to the king. So it immobilizes this knight, which was trying to influence the center here. And it also allows Karpov to castle quickly here. And if you want to play your best chess, you have to try and find moves that accomplish more than one thing. So this move, for example, develops the bishop off the back rank. And that's one of your goals in the opening, is to get your pieces off the back rank, especially knights and bishops. The rooks, sometimes they stay on the back rank for quite a while. But develop the bishop off the back rank. That's one of the reasons this move was made. One of the things it accomplished, developing a piece. It indirectly controls the center. It's not attacking the center, but it's pinning a knight to the king and preventing that knight from influencing the center now. And this move also allows the king to get ready to castle. And especially you beginners out there, you want to try and castle most of the time. Now, there's always exceptions to all the rules in chess, but you want to castle quickly and castle often, because if your king gets stuck in the center, it can be attacked, from 3 different directions here. Whereas once the king castles, it can only be attacked from head on and from this side. Nothing can come from off the board and attack. All right, the game continues with a good developing move, just bringing a knight out. And if you want to play your best chess, remember the rule that in general, you want to bring the knights out before the bishops, unless you have a good reason to bring the bishop out, which this was a good move here in this opening, bringing the bishop here and pinning the knight to the king. But knights can usually be brought to f3 and c3 for the white knights, and then f6 and c6 for the black knights, because these are almost always good squares to place the knights on, because they influence important squares in the center. And these 4 central squares here are generally the most important squares on the chessboard. Why? And if you want to play your best chess, I would recommend you ask why often. Why is a move being made by your opponent or by yourself? Why should you make this move, whatever that move may be? And if somebody tells you, oh, these 4 squares in the center are the most important area of the board, you should ask yourself why, and it'll help you understand chess better. Why are these so important? Well, consider this the high ground on a battlefield. From the center here, you can look down, over the board, over the entire board, in all different directions. So if you control the center and your pieces can more easily move through the center, they can go to anywhere else on the board from the center. So you want to try and influence the center and do the opposite for your opponent. Prevent them from influencing the center. All right, here we go. Now, if you let your opponent, so Karpov let his opponent control the central squares with these pawns, you have to be careful that they don't completely overrun the center of the board. So at some point you want to counterattack. So this is a good counterattacking move. And remember to play your best chess. Look for ways to trade a less valuable piece or pawn for your opponent's more valuable piece or pawn. So now these pawns are confronting one another, and we have a less valuable pawn on the side, a flank pawn, attacking the more valuable central pawn. Why is the central pawn more valuable? Well, like I said, it's controlling the center of the board, which is more or the most important area in the board. Unless the king is under attack, then of course that would be more important. All right, we have this move, g3, being played by Karpov, which will allow the bishop to fianchetto here, and then he can castle. So the game continues with the knight jumping forward here, adding more pressure to this pinned piece. So the knight is pinned, and sometimes if you have a pinned piece, you can pin it and then try and win it by adding more pressure. So now we have another piece attacking this pinned knight, which is paralyzed. So what does Kasparov do? He centralizes his queen, which helps protect the knight along with this pawn, and it immediately attacks this knight in the center. So Kasparov ignores that, ignores this attack on his knight, and just adds more pressure to the pinned piece. So this is a very valuable lesson that can be learned to use in your own chess games. If your opponent is attacking you, well, a lot of beginners want to react by, oh, I'm under attack, I have to deal with that immediately. Well, if they deal with that threat, they may be overlooking an even more powerful counter threat. And also, by just ignoring this attack on their knight, they are able to develop another piece. So now the queen jumps into the battle. The queen is developed off the back rank and tries to conduct another powerful attack. So, if the queen captures the knight here, well, then you have a possibility of the bishop capturing this knight. And if the pawn were to capture, well, then the queen can capture, forking the king and this rook here. So, an important lesson is learned here, that you don't always want to just react to what your opponent is doing. Sometimes you can, ignore what they're doing and bring up another piece, or develop something, a piece that helps you conduct an even more powerful attack. So here we go. Kasparov decides to capture the knight here, and the opponent captures likewise here. So knight for knight, and things are even, but we have a check on the king. Now we already saw that this pawn does not want to capture, or it could lead to the queen recapturing, forking the king and the rook here. So what does Kasparov do? He decides to block with the bishop here, and then we have capture, knight captures, and the queen drops back, targeting this pawn. The computer says this is an inaccuracy, that it would have been better to keep the queen pinning this knight to the king and just develop the knight here. Also, there's this threat. of the pawn capturing. So this is probably why Kasparov did this, because the queen and pawn are piling up here, and the queen is also attacking here. So the game continues with Kasparov deciding to attack, and the queen is under pressure here. Should the queen capture the pawn here or this pawn here? If the queen captured here, well, then there's a possibility maybe of the rook counterattacking the queen. But then, of course, the queen could maybe capture this pawn as well. All right, so how does the game continue? The queen does capture, and apparently that is best. But at this point, white is ahead by 0.62 here. So over half a pawn's worth of material. And like I said, the rook moves here, attacking the queen, backed up by the knight. So what does the queen do? It does not. The queen does not capture this free pawn. And if you want to play better chess, sometimes you have to restrain yourself from pawn hunting because it could lead to problems. Here, even the computer says it's not best to take this free pawn, that it would be better for the queen to go to a3 here. So, then the queen would be attacking this pawn. All right, here we go. Queen attacking queen. Kasparov exchanges. So Kasparov is more of a strategic player. So by getting rid of the queens, that takes the game into an end game. Maybe less tactics, more strategic maneuvering. Also, Kasparov, for the moment, is left with this backward pawn, and his central pawns are kind of restricting his bishop, although this bishop probably wants to go here, where it will have more scope, aiming up here towards the queen side, along with this rook. So the game continues with knight developing, eyeing this unprotected pawn, and so the d pawn pushes forward, protecting. And the game continues with rook to b8, the best move in the position. Why? Because once this bishop moves here, like I said, it will pile up on this pawn along with the rook. And, what can be done? The rook will be forced to help protect. So, this is kind of a prophylactic move. If you're not familiar with that, it's kind of defending ahead of time, defending before you have to, making a move that helps in your defense before your opponent piles up an attack on a piece or a pawn. All right, so Kasparov develops the bishop, piling up on the b7 pawn with the rook, and the king moves forward. Another lesson here for you to be able to play your best chess. Sometimes you have to watch out that you don't just go on autopilot, making moves that look good, but maybe they're not as good as you thought. A beginner may just automatically castle here, bringing the king into safety behind these pawns, bringing the rook closer towards the center, and that is not the best move. Here, king to e7 is, because in the end game, especially when the pieces are coming off the board, queens are off the board, bishops and knights have been removed from the board. As there are less and less pieces on the board, the kings become more powerful and more valuable to help in offense and defense. And you want to get your kings in towards the center of the board where they can help influence the game. So castling would just throw your king into the corner where it would not be as useful. And so here, Kasparov does the same. Although in this instance, the computer believes that it would have been better to castle here. Now why? Maybe because this bishop is fianchettoed here, the king would be able to castle and protect the bishop, maybe. Especially if we have a future pawn push and maybe the bishop develops here and they confront one another, then a king over here would be able to defend. But anyway, moving on. Another thing, if you want to play your best chess, you have to get all your pieces involved and find your worst placed piece and improve it. And that's exactly what Kasparov did here. He had a rook that was doing nothing in the corner here on h8, and he brings it towards the center behind maybe a pawn that he plans to push forward in the future. So, what does Kasparov do? He does not improve his worst placed piece, this rook on h1. Instead, he jumps a knight into the center of the board, maybe looking to jump into this fine outpost here. That's one possibility, and target the bishop. If he traded the knight for this bishop here, it would leave him in an endgame where Karpov has a knight versus a bishop. And if you go into an endgame with knight versus bishop, you want to have the bishop if there are pawns on both sides of the board like there are here. Why? Remember to always ask why when you're trying to figure things out in chess. Well, why is it better to have the bishop in an endgame with pawns on both sides of the board? Because the bishop can get across the board much quicker than the knight in one move, whereas it might take a knight, 2 or 3 moves or more to get across the board. All right, so here we go. Pawn is pushing forward, the best move, and these two pawns confront one another. The threat, is maybe capture, and then if the knight captures, well then the knight could recapture. But maybe we have this pawn attacking here to get rid of this defender of the d6 square. That way the knight will not be able to land in here and be protected by a pawn on this nice outpost. And you want to look for outpost squares. That's another way to play your best chess. A square, especially like this, if you could move the knight here to d6 where no pawns can chase that knight away, and especially if you could have a pawn here to protect the knight, that would be even better. And so that's probably why Karpov is trying to trade off this defender. So the knight jumps into the outpost anyway, attacking the bishop. The knight repositions here. And now, why is the knight repositioning here? Well, maybe he wants to jump here and chase that knight out of that good outpost. So the game continues with the rook jumping forward here. Perhaps Kasparov is getting ready to double rooks. Always a good plan. Well, usually a good plan. I should never say always because there can be exceptions to every rule. And also, maybe the knight or rook, would it want to go here and target this unprotected pawn? All right, let's see what happens. The knight drops back, and this is a great move by Karpov, trying to get rid of this fine knight that has posted itself on this outpost in enemy territory. So the knights are exchanged, and the king captures here. And apparently it would be better to capture with the rook, because now the king will have to move back, up here. If the rook would have captured, the rook is already on the back rank anyway, so it's better to keep the king up towards the center of the board. The rooks double. So this is getting dangerous here. Now there's the threat of capture. If the pawn recaptures, well then the rook could capture and go ahead a pawn here. So now we have another example here where if you have one threat building up against you, a lot of times, if you can, it's better to ignore that threat with a stronger counter threat. And that's what Karpov does here. We can have an exchange here, like I said, with all these pieces piling up here. But Karpov ignores that in favor of getting his bishop to a better diagonal here. So the bishop moves forward on this diagonal, lining up on the king and this pawn here. So if there's an exchange here on b6, the bishop would be able to capture here this unprotected c4 pawn, and it would be better placed there than back where that bishop was. So the king moves up here, getting out of the line of fire, but this is a mistake. Apparently, king to d2 would have been better. So white is still ahead here. Kasparov still has the lead. And now the blunder. The big blunder of the game, and this is almost an immediate game-losing blunder, and it's probably what did lead to a losing game. So the pawn pushes forward here, and what would have been best? Rook at d to c8 would have been better. So it looks like it would have been better to move the rook to the half-open file and target these pawns here. If these pawns exchange, well then bishop and rook would pile up on this pawn here. All right, so the blunder is played. How does Kasparov take advantage of this? By playing the best response. He captures en passant. So we have a capture. Now this pawn is not recaptured by Karpov. And it looks like it would have been best to play bishop to b7 and get rid of this great bishop on the diagonal here, perhaps. King moves towards the center, and inaccuracy. Rook to a4, attacking the bishop. Ooh, did Kasparov overlook something here? Well, no, the bishop could capture here, backed up by this rook, so that's a possibility, if the bishop is attacked with rook to a4. So Kasparov, moves to the center here, trying to help protect this pawn along with his rook. And we have a capture here. The best move, regaining the piece, equalizing material, or I should say regaining the pawn, and pinning this pawn to the king. Maybe with an idea of pushing forward. We'll see what happens. So finally, this move is played, and now the computer's saying this is still a great move. We have the pawn pushing forward here. Very interesting move, the best move. Now the rook is protecting, and so the game continues with capture and a pin. So the rook is pinning the pawn to the other rook, and the rooks double, and now a retreat. Bishops are exchanged, and the pawn majority is moving here. So Kasparov ahead here in the endgame by one pawn, and he has a queenside pawn majority. This is another example of why you want your king in towards the center in the endgame, because if the king had castled and was still stuck way over here, it would take longer to get over and try and stop this passed pawn or possible passed pawn. If these pawns exchange at some point and the queenside pawn tries to march up the board. So the king heading back towards the center, and this h4 move is played, gaining space on the queen side. Maybe trying to start limiting the pawn moves available to his opponent. So h6 is played, although the computer likes g6 here. And the game continues with f3. And rook centralizes, adding pressure to this pawn, although it's defended adequately at the moment. And the game continues with the rook grabbing the open file here. And now rooks double up on the d file, adding pressure to this pawn. and Kasparov ignores that in favor of getting his pawn majority moving here on the queen side. And what, like another good thing to do if you really want to play your best chess and improve your game, is you have to know that if you are behind in material, you want to trade pawns, try and get the pawns off the board, and then you'll have less to worry about, especially if you were in like a knight or bishop endgame and all the pawns are exchanged. Well, then if there's just a lone, even if somebody is ahead by a bishop and all the pawns are traded off, a bishop and a king, of course, cannot win, cannot checkmate a lone king. So, because Karpov is behind here, he wants to trade off pawns with Kasparov, try and get rid of all these pawns, and that's less for him to deal with and worry about. So, we have a capture, recapture, and now there's pressure on this unprotected G pawn. The pawn pushes forward, and we have H5 here. You know, trying to trade off this pair of pawns. If there's a capture by white, well then the rook will recapture. If it's ignored, well then the pawn can capture, and then after recapture, rook would capture. So, what does Kasparov do? He ignores that, playing the best move, which is a great move here. Trying to get this passed pawn and capture, recapture, and he's done it. He has a passed pawn on the queen side, which is going to be very hard to deal with as it is almost promoted here. The rook is stopping it at the moment and blockades, but now this rook is playing defense. And so the game continues with rook facing rook here. And then this is blocked with a pawn move. Capture, capture, and now the king moves over here to help with the promotion of this pawn. And so the game is almost over here. We have rook to h8, getting ready maybe to double up on this pawn. And after king to b5, the king jumps up in here to help. And the game continues with rook grabbing the open file. And the final move is, rook's doubling up here. And this is where the game ended. Karpov resigned. But how could the game continue here? Let's take a look at this. So, wonder why. I apologize for this. It's not showing the computer moves here on this analysis. Oh man. Yeah, I apologize for that. The analysis must have been turned off for some reason. So you weren't able to take a look at this while I was going over this game. I'll have to remember to keep an eye on that next time. Anyway, now at least we can see what is happening here, and I should have had that on the whole time. But anyway, hopefully you still learned quite a bit. And let's see here. It looks like the game ended here, but how could it have continued? Rook at b to b8 is the recommendation here. Oh, excuse me, that was wrong. That was the a rook. So, or rook at a to b8. Now it's saying that's fine as well. So something like this. But then you have a fork here. All right. Forcing a rook to capture, or Kasparov could capture. But anyway, a trade here. And then rook captures with check. King moves up. And then rook to c5. So this effectively cuts off the king and prevents this pawn from moving forward. And white's king can start marching up here, perhaps, trying to help escort this pawn forward. So it looks like the computer recommends king back to d7, rook to c7 check, king moves forward, rook back to here. All right, and then if the king moves here and you don't want to have a draw by repetition, well, now they recommend this. So rook to b7, preventing the pawn from moving forward. f4, really locking this pawn down, although now they're saying rook to c5 would be good. And then rook to b8. Rook to c3 is recommended. King up to d6 is best. And now, should you move your king forward? What does it say about that move? Then they recommend this. King up to b7. Oh, they don't like that. They think king back to b5 is better. So apparently it's winning with this passed pawn over here. You know, it just might be a little bit of a chore to get this pawn moving, you know, especially after this move. Well, now they recommend rook to d3. But this kind of lets the opponent's king come in and help up to d5. Anyway, you can take a look at this further on your own. I'm not going to just drag the video out even longer. But you would want to try and get this, if we go back here, you probably want to keep your rook here, preventing the king from coming over to stop this pawn. And then if king to d6 is played, rook to c5 kind of blocks the king out. King back to d7. Now they're saying rook to c7 is recommended. King would have to move forward. And then what if you did this now? Well, now they recommend rook to g8 as best. Man, it just looks like it'd be really hard to get this moving. Maybe try that. Rook to g3. Oh, excuse me, g3. Rook to g3, because then there's a threat of going here. Especially if this pawn pushes forward, you can have the threat of attacking the king back and forth. Rook to a8. Apparently that's best. King up to d7. Now the pawn starts moving. Rook to a3. King moves. Rook to b3. And it's kind of over after this. They recommend king to a6. Well, then rook to a3. Apparently that's best. King up to b8. Yeah, and it says that white is really winning here. It's just not so easy to get that pawn promoted, it looks like. All right. Anyway, let's end it there. Feel free to leave any comments as usual. Like and subscribe to support the channel if you haven't already. Thank you for watching and have a super chess day.